Today, we're talking about one of the biggest shakeups in New Zealand construction contracts we've seen in a decade. The new NZS 3910-2023. And we're going to focus on something that, if you're in this industry, is absolutely critical: how risk gets allocated. It's a truly fundamental shift. Look, if you're a QS, a construction manager, or a lawyer in this game, you know the deal. Risk allocation is the bedrock of everything. It's what decides who's on the hook when things go sideways. And let's be clear, this 2023 standard, it doesn't just tweak the rules. It basically throws out some key pages of the old playbook and writes completely new ones. And that's really the main thing to get your head around. We're not talking about a few minor tweaks to some clauses here and there. Nope, this is a full-on deliberate recalibration of risk. The whole point is to inject a massive dose of clarity and fairness into the system right from day one to hopefully, just hopefully, cut down on all those disputes. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll tackle the old problem of that. Let's call it the conflicted dual role and the new fix for it. Then we'll dive into some new tools for managing your financial and liability risk. We'll touch on a few other key shifts. And finally, wrap up by looking at what this all means for the future of contracts here in New Zealand. Alright, let's kick things off with the big one. This is the biggest structural problem the new standard really wanted to solve. That massive baked-in conflict of interest with the engineer to the contract role. You know, this really gets to the heart of it. The 2013 standard basically sets up an impossible task. It said the engineer had this dual role. So on one hand, they're the principal's agent, hired by them, paid by them, but then, in the very next breath, they're supposed to be this completely fair and impartial judge on massive things like variations and EOTs. How does that even work? And that created a huge risk for everyone. Let's make this real. Picture this. You're on site. You hit some gnarly ground conditions nobody expected, and the contractor puts in a massive variation claim. Now, the engineer who's got the principal's budget breathing down their neck is also the person who has to independently and fairly rule on that claim. I mean, come on, even with the best will in the world, the potential for bias or even just the perception of bias is just huge. And that ambiguity, it was an absolute breeding ground for disputes. So the big question is, how does the 2023 standard fix this mess? Well, it tackles the problem head-on with a really elegant, powerful solution. It just splits the role in two. And here you can see it side by side. It's pretty stark. The old conflicted engineer to the contract is gone, vanished, and in its place we get two separate specialist roles: the contract administrator and the independent certifier. Trust me, this is way more than just a name change. This is a fundamental separation of powers. So let's look at the first one, the contract administrator. Their job is crystal clear. They act for the principal. That's it. Plain and simple. They are the ones managing the contract day to day, issuing instructions, and their loyalty is 100% with the principal. There's no pretending to be impartial, and honestly, that clarity is such a breath of fresh air. And then you have the independent certifier. Now, this person is required by the contract to be fair, impartial, and independent. Their whole job is to make those big, tough calls, valuing the variations, ruling on EOTs, certifying payments, and to do it without any pressure or bias. They're basically the neutral umpire that the industry has been crying out for. And here's the bottom line. This new setup deals with the risk of a biased decision by just removing the conflict altogether. It's so simple. Now everyone knows exactly who's who. The contract administrator speaks for the principal, and the independent certifier is the objective referee. No more guessing games. Okay, So we've sorted out the rules, but the 2023 standard doesn't stop there. It also gives us some new and better tools for managing financial and liability risk, and is all about pushing things in a more collaborative direction. One of the biggest new things is the formal introduction of a target cost contract. Now this is a really powerful way to share risk. So instead of being stuck with just a fixed price or a cost plus model, the parties can agree on a target cost. If the contractor beats the target, everyone shares the savings. If they go over, everyone shares the pain, though usually with some kind of cap to protect the contractor. It's a real pain share, gain share model. Think about it like this. Let's say you've got a fit-out project with a target cost of, say, $5 million. If the contractor works their magic and brings it in for $4.8 million, that $200,000 saving gets split, maybe 50-50. Suddenly, everyone's incentivized to be more efficient to collaborate. Risk management stops being this big battle and becomes a shared goal. Okay, let's switch gears to liability. Under the old 2013 standard, you had this really broad and frankly often pretty contentious indemnity framework. And the new standard flips that to a much smarter fault-based and capped liability. So, first things first, indemnity is now explicitly fault-based. What does that mean? It means liability gets shared out proportionally. If there is a problem and both the principal and the contractor had a hand in causing it, the liability is split based on who is at fault and by how much. It's just a much fairer way to allocate risk instead of the old all or nothing game. And the second thing, and this is a big one, is the option to actually cap the contractor's total liability. This is a genuine game changer. It means both sides can agree on a maximum risk exposure for the contractor right at the start. For things like getting professional indemnity insurance and just general financial planning for the project, that kind of certainty is huge. Alright, the standard also tidies up a few other areas to get rid of ambiguity and cut down on risk. Let's just quickly hit two of the most important ones. Okay, you'll know this pain. The old standard had this vague idea that all the contract documents were mutually explanatory. Well, that was great until the spec said one thing and the drawing said another, and then you're off to the lawyers. The 2023 version fixes this by introducing a clear order of precedence. Now there's a pecking order. If there's a conflict, the contract tells you which document wins. That simple change is going to cut down so much legal risk and bringing the contract right into the 21st century. There are now explicit environmental obligations. It formally puts the responsibility for preventing things like contamination squarely on the contractor. This cleans up what used to be a real gray area and gets the contract in line with modern laws and, what society expects. So when you step back and look at all these changes together, a really clear picture starts to form. The NZS 3910/2023 is all about one thing, really creating a new era of clarity when it comes to risk. So what are the big things you need to walk away with? Well, first, we are moving from ambiguity to absolute clarity, especially in who does what. Second, we're going from that broken, conflicted dual role to a clean separation of powers. And maybe the biggest shift of all, we're moving away from just trying to dump risk on the other party and towards collaborative tools like target cost contracts that help everyone manage it together. Now, all of this is designed to cut down on disputes and help projects run smoother. But here's the million-dollar question, isn't it? As the whole industry gets used to these new rules, are we actually going to see fewer disputes, or are we just going to find new things to argue about? I guess only time will tell. Thanks for tuning in. If you find this episode useful, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye.